A viper can kill a medium-sized dog in less than an hour. Its venom destroys blood, causes internal bleeding, and, in severe cases, stops the heart. Without medical assistance, a human dies after its bite in about 1 out of 10 cases. Now, imagine a laboratory where a scientist takes a tiny, spiky creature weighing less than a kilogram and injects it with a dose of venom 40 times higher than what kills a guinea pig in 3 minutes. 40 times. Any other creature of that size would die almost instantly. Yet, this little animal walked away with a mild swelling near the injection site and was completely healthy 2 days later. And here is the strangest thing. No antidote was administered to it. It already had it since birth, built right into its blood. This animal is an ordinary hedgehog, the very same one you might have fed milk from a saucer in your childhood and considered a sweet, harmless cartoon character. Well, everything you were told about the hedgehog is just a beautiful, cozy wrapper, and underneath it hides a completely different animal. One of the oldest, strangest, and frankly speaking, most underrated predators of our continent. Today, I will tell you everything I know about it myself. And believe me, by the end of this video, you will look at the hedgehog with different eyes. If you are interested in the wild world, subscribe right now. New videos about animals and nature come out here every week. Let's start with the simplest thing, with what almost everyone gets wrong. The hedgehog is not a rodent. It is not a relative of a mouse, rat, or squirrel. When I found out myself, I just sat there for a few seconds digesting it, because all my life I was convinced of the opposite. In fact, the hedgehog belongs to insectivores, to the same order as shrews, moles, and desmans. That is, the closest relative of a hedgehog is not a hamster, but a mole. If you think about it, this explains a lot. The hedgehog digs, the hedgehog hunts in the grass and underground. It has poor eyesight and a phenomenal sense of smell. Everything is like a mole's, only with needles and on the surface. The very scientific name of its genus comes from a Latin word, meaning spiky. In total, 17 species of hedgehogs live in the world today, in Europe, Asia, and Africa. But there are no hedgehogs in both Americas, and they were never there. Nobody brought them to Australia either. This is purely an old world animal, a beast of the old world. The most common for our regions is the European hedgehog, and it is about it that the main conversation will be. Now about the main myth, the very one with an apple on its back. You have probably seen this picture dozens of times. A hedgehog wanders through an autumn forest, and mushrooms and apples are pinned on its needles, which it carries to its burrow for the winter. Well, this is a fabrication. And an ancient fabrication. It was launched by the Roman scientist Pliny the Elder almost 2,000 years ago. He wrote that hedgehogs pin fruits on their needles to carry them home. Pliny was wrong. In 2,000 years of observing hedgehogs, no one has ever seen in nature a hedgehog doing this. Moreover, hedgehogs barely eat fruits. They are predators. But the myth turned out to be incredibly resilient, and artists of all eras continued to draw a hedgehog with an apple. Meanwhile, the real hedgehog was busy with completely different things. What kind? I will tell you now. The main weapon of a hedgehog is, of course, needles, and here begin numbers that are hard to fit in your head. An adult hedgehog has from 5,000 to 7,000 needles on its back. The exact number depends on the age, sex, and simply on the characteristics of a specific animal. One zoologist in the last century, for the sake of scientific curiosity, manually counted the needles of 3 dead hedgehogs. It turned out 5,100, 5,800, and 6,200. An occupation, frankly speaking, for an amateur. In its essence, a needle is a modified hair. The same keratin from which your nails and hair are made, only compacted into a rigid tube with a sharp tip. Each needle is about 2.5 centimeters long, and inside it is not solid, but hollow, filled with microscopic chambers, like honeycombs. That is why a needle is simultaneously light and very strong. And here begins what almost nobody knows. A hedgehog's needles are not only a weapon, it is also a shock absorber. Scientists noticed a strange thing long ago. Hedgehogs sometimes fall from a great height and remain unharmed. I didn't believe it at first, but it is a proven fact. A hedgehog can survive a fall from a height of up to 10 meters. This is roughly the 3rd floor. A cat will rarely survive this, and a rodent will not survive at all. The hedgehog simply curls up into a ball, the needles spring, cushion the blow, and it lands almost without damage, shook itself off and walked away. Nature made him a living shock-proof suit. And the most amazing thing is not even this. The most amazing thing is how a hedgehog controls its needles. Each needle sits on its own tiny muscle. This means that a hedgehog can raise one needle and lower another. It can bristle only on one side, can control its armor literally by individual points. Imagine that you can move each hair on your head separately. That's about the level of control a hedgehog has over its own needles. And when it becomes truly dangerous, 2 powerful ring muscles along the back come into play. They pull the whole skin together, like drawstrings on a bag. The muzzle, paws, soft, defenseless belly. Everything hides inside, and only a perfect spiky ball sticks out. Try to bite one like that. A predator's mouth simply cannot close on this ball without getting hurt. And here it is important to dispel a couple more myths. A hedgehog's needles do not shoot. This is not a porcupine. A porcupine has needles with barbs. They dig in and remain in the wound. And a hedgehog's needles are smooth and by themselves non-poisonous. The hedgehog's strategy is not an attack, it is a patient, blind defense. Curled up and waits. Minimum effort, maximum effect. A hedgehog can sit in such a ball literally for hours until the predator gets tired and leaves. And in most cases, the predator leaves, because having received these needles under the gums once, any beast learns a lesson for life. But with one opponent, this tactic works completely differently. And it is for the sake of this opponent, I think, many of you came to this video. We are talking, of course, about a snake. This is probably the most underrated story in all the biology of our continent, because almost nobody understands what is actually happening there. The viper is the only truly dangerous venomous snake in most of our territory. Its venom works on blood, destroys cells, causes swelling and bleeding. A dog weighing 10 kilograms after its bite dies in about half of the cases. A cat almost always. And a hedgehog eats this viper for lunch, and people have known about it for a long time. A few centuries ago, villagers specially brought hedgehogs to their plots so that they would catch snakes. In the century before last, in many regions, hedgehogs were kept in houses much like cats, only instead of mice, they caught vipers. This was common peasant knowledge, and here is what the hunt itself looks like. A hedgehog senses a snake from afar. It relies on smell much more than on eyes. It approaches. The viper stands in a stance, hisses, prepares to strike. The hedgehog makes a short lunge and immediately curls up. The snake strikes and runs into needles. The venom gets into the needle in vain. It doesn't pass into the blood. The snake strikes again, needles again, and the hedgehog meanwhile rolls a little closer. And when the snake gets tired and becomes slower, the hedgehog sharply unrolls and grabs it by the head. Its teeth are arranged in such a way that biting a snake behind the skull is a matter of one movement. This entire duel usually takes from 15 to 40 minutes. The hedgehog is in no hurry. It knows that even if the snake reaches it in an unprotected place, the venom will barely work. It has time. The viper has no time. I honestly tried to imagine this scene in my head. A tiny, spiky ball methodically wears out a viper for 40 minutes and rolls closer and closer. This is not even a hunt. This is a siege of a fortress, where the fortress is more patient than the snake. And here the main question arises: why does the venom barely work on a hedgehog? And the answer to this question at one time produced the effect of an exploding bomb. In 1966, one toxicologist conducted a series of experiments from which today's ethics committees would probably clutch their heads. But science back then was different. He injected hedgehogs with doses of snake venom 40 times, exceeding the lethal dose for a guinea pig of the same weight. The guinea pig died in 3 minutes. The hedgehog got off with a slight swelling and was healthy in a couple of days. 40 lethal doses, and the hedgehog survived. Until that moment, it was believed that the hedgehog's resistance to venom was a folktale, an exaggeration. And here, it turned out that it is a hard, measurable biochemical fact. Further, even more, it turned out that a special protein circulates in the blood of a hedgehog, which binds to venom toxins and neutralizes them even before they have time to harm the tissues. And this is not a common immunity. These are not antibodies that the body produces after the first encounter with a threat. This is an innate defense built into the hedgehog from birth. A hedgehog can never meet a snake in its entire life and will still be protected from it. And later, scientists found out something else. This protein neutralizes not only viper venom, it works against the venom of rattlesnakes, against some components of bee venom, even against scorpion venom. This is, in essence, a universal antidote that a hedgehog carries in its blood simply because it was born that way. This is, perhaps, what amazed me the most in this entire topic. We, humans, have been fighting for decades to create a universal serum against snake bites. We spend millions, drive research, build laboratories, and a hedgehog has this thing built in for free and works flawlessly. And today, pharmaceutical companies are seriously studying this hedgehog protein as the basis for a new generation of antidotes. If scientists succeed in synthesizing its analog in the laboratory, it will be a real revolution in the treatment of snake bites around the world. And in this, there is some almost mocking irony. Nature solved this problem about 15 million years ago, and since then has been quietly carrying a ready-made solution on the back of a small, spiky animal that doesn't even suspect what a treasure it possesses. I confess, honestly, all my life I thought that a hedgehog is a cozy lump that drinks milk and looks sadly at the moon. But it turned out to be a professional killer of snakes with a built-in pharmacy in its blood. And if you think that the hedgehog's invulnerability ends with snakes, then no. Snake venom is only the beginning. A hedgehog is generally a walking laboratory for neutralizing everything that is considered deadly in nature. Take blister beetles. They contain a substance that is a strong poison for most animals. A hedgehog eats them completely calmly. Special bacteria live in its stomach, which neutralize insect toxins. So what any other creature would be poisoned by, for a hedgehog is just dinner. Further, even more interesting, a hedgehog can eat a death cap, the very mushroom a tiny piece of which is enough to kill an adult human, destroying their liver. The poison does not work on a hedgehog. How exactly, scientists still don't really know. Just another riddle of hedgehog biochemistry without an answer. But my favorite example is bees. A hedgehog can eat live stinging bees. It approaches a hive, scratches the entrance with its muzzle, and begins to eat bees one by one. They sting it in the nose, in the muzzle, in the paws, and it continues to eat. Bee venom barely works on it, thanks to that very protein in the blood. There is, of course, little pleasure. The muzzle swells after such a feast, and for a few days the hedgehog walks with a swelling. But it is alive and full. But beekeepers, to put it mildly, dislike hedgehogs for this. A good hive in one night can lose up to 1,000 bees because of a hedgehog. For an apiary, this is very significant. It paints a portrait of a creature that nature seems to have custom built for survival in a world of poisons. Snakes, toxic beetles, deadly mushrooms, bees. Everything that spells danger or death for us is just a different item on the hedgehog's menu. And all of this in an animal the size of a milk carton, weighing less than a kilogram. Speaking of milk, there's a story connected to the hedgehog's diet that hits very close to home for many of you, and it is sadder than it seems. Almost everything you know about what a hedgehog eats is likely wrong. Let's start with the core fact. The hedgehog is a predator. Its primary food is meat. About 90% of what a hedgehog consumes throughout its life consists of insects, worms, slugs, and small animals. It eats plants rarely and reluctantly. Its digestive system is simply not built for them. If a hedgehog chews on a fallen apple, it's about the same for him as it would be for you to chew on cardboard out of starvation. You can do it, but there's very little point. Here is what it actually eats. First place, beetles and their larvae. Earthworms, up to 100 pieces in a single night. In one night, a hedgehog can eat worms with a total weight of up to 200 grams. That is almost half of its own body weight. Imagine a human eating 30 kilograms of meat overnight. Then come slugs and snails, and it eats snails right along with their shells. After that, caterpillars, centipedes, spiders, frogs, mice, and bird eggs if it finds a nest on the ground. There is an old gardening observation. If a hedgehog settles in a garden, there will be no slugs left. Simply none. He will eat them all. A single hedgehog can clear a plot of nearly a hectare of slugs in a season. It is a free, living, and highly effective form of garden protection. And now, the very reason I started this section. Milk. Please remember this once and for all. You must never give a hedgehog milk in any form. Hedgehogs lack the enzyme to break down milk sugar. Milk causes severe digestive distress, dehydration, and often death in them. The most painful part is that it doesn't happen right away. A kind person pours a saucer of milk for a hedgehog, feels happy that they fed the little creature, and the hedgehog drinks it and walks away. A day or two later, it dies somewhere in the grass from intestinal failure, and the person will never even know. I'll be honest, when I was a child at our dacha, a hedgehog lived under the porch, and every evening we would put out a saucer of milk for him, proud that we were helping nature. Now, I know that we were slowly poisoning him. Even now, that thought makes me uncomfortable. If you truly want to help a hedgehog, pour it some ordinary, clean water. That is all it needs from you. You can also put out a little cat food without additives, but never milk. By the way, care for hedgehogs in some countries has reached the point where they have invented hedgehog corridors, small holes in fences between plots, so that hedgehogs can roam freely around the neighborhood. They even introduced a specific size standard for these holes, 13 by 13 centimeters, just enough for an adult hedgehog to pass through. People are literally designing fences around the convenience of hedgehogs. And in this, it seems to me, there is something very right. But next, I will tell you about a habit of the hedgehog compared to which even eating live bees seems ordinary. This habit still has no clear explanation, and scientists have been scratching their heads over it for decades. It is called self-anointing. It looks like this. The hedgehog finds some new, strongly smelling object. It can be anything: a piece of soap, a rotten apple, toad skin, a cigarette butt, or a rag smelling of machine oil. The hedgehog starts to chew on this find. An abundant, frothy saliva forms in its mouth. And then a real ritual begins. The hedgehog contorts into almost acrobatic poses, twisting its head back at unimaginable angles, and begins to smear this foam onto its needles, its back, and its sides. It can engage in this from a few minutes up to an hour, until its entire back is covered in a foamy layer smelling of the found object. At the same time, it seems to fall into a trance, completely ignoring what is happening around it. Why it does this, nobody knows for sure. There are several theories. First, masking its own scent so that predators won't catch its trail. Second, protection against parasites like fleas and ticks. And third, the most chilling one, the hedgehog charges its needles with poison this way. Biologists have documented cases where a hedgehog anointed itself with foam made from the chewed skin of a common toad, which contains a potent toxin. After this procedure, the hedgehog's needles became truly poisonous, and a poke from them caused a severe reaction even in humans. That is, the hedgehog, consciously or not, turns its armor into a poisoned weapon. The funniest cases are also documented. Once, a hedgehog self-indulgently anointed itself with chewed chewing gum picked up from the street, and afterward looked like a small, pink, spiky ball. What is particularly strange is that a hedgehog doesn't only do this in times of danger. It can anoint itself just like that, out of curiosity, upon encountering a new scent. Hoglets start doing this at around 3 weeks of age, even before they leave the nest for the first time. A tiny baby hedgehog, whose eyes have just opened, already finds the right object without any training, and repeats a ritual that its ancestors have repeated for 15 million years. It is like an innate dance that nobody showed them, but which is written somewhere deep inside. Here is a question for you. Let's pause for a second. Have you noticed any quirks in your cats or dogs that defy any logic when they suddenly do something completely inexplicable? Write in the comments. I'm truly interested in gathering such stories. Now, we move on to what happens to the hedgehog in winter. And by medical standards, what it does can only be described as a resurrection. When the temperature drops below 10 degrees, which is usually the end of October, the hedgehog goes into hibernation. But a hedgehog's hibernation is not sleep in the usual sense. It is something far more radical. Its body temperature drops from its usual 34 degrees down to 1 to 2 degrees, almost to 0. Its heart, which beats up to 250 times per minute in an active state, slows down to literally a couple of beats. Its breathing is 1 breath per minute. 1 breath. Its metabolism drops by nearly 100%. If a human were found in such a state, any doctor applying a stethoscope would pronounce them dead without hesitation. The body is cold. The heart barely beats. There is no breath. But the hedgehog is not dead. It lives in a minimum power mode and spends 5 to 6 months this way. It has a place to sleep. The hedgehog builds its winter burrow in advance back in autumn, and it is a serious piece of engineering. Inside is a chamber the size of a shoebox, lined with dry leaves, grass, and moss. The thermal insulation of this burrow is such that it stays around 5 degrees inside, even when it is minus 20 degrees outside. The hedgehog sleeps in its own thermos that it built for itself, and it is supported during this time by a special reserve. By the beginning of autumn, the hedgehog must gain weight, ideally around 1 kilogram, otherwise it won't survive the winter. And its fat is of 2 types: ordinary white fat, which is fuel, and a special brown fat, which is essentially a biological heater. When the hedgehog needs to wake up, the brown fat begins to burn rapidly, warming the body from the inside. Within a couple of hours, the hedgehog raises its temperature from 1 degree to 34. Imagine the scale. A creature that by all indications was dead revives itself in 2 hours. And here lies a cruel paradox. Warm winters are more dangerous for a hedgehog than cold ones. Every awakening in the winter burns a monstrous amount of energy, as much as a whole week of active summer life. If the winter is warm and the hedgehog wakes up too often, it simply eats through all its reserves and doesn't live to see spring. With climate change, such winters have become common. This is one of the quiet reasons why hedgehogs are becoming fewer. This beast was the size of a medium dog. It had a long snout, large jaws, and judging by everything, it did not feed on worms. Its diet included other mammals. Imagine for a moment a hedgehog the size of a dog hunting animals of your size in miniature. The ancient world knew such hedgehogs too. Evolution later bet on a small, economical, armored model and didn't lose. The giants died out, while the modest, spiky creature the size of a palm made it to our days. And here is another detail that is hard to believe the first time around. The hedgehog has a highly unexpected relative, the bat. Yes, that very one. Once, tens of millions of years ago, they shared a common ancestor from an ancient branch of insectivores. Then their evolutionary paths diverged. Some took to the air and began hunting on the fly. Others stayed on the ground and learned to dig. If you look at their structure and genes, the relationship is still visible. They are like cousins who chose completely different professions. One became an acrobat of the night sky, the other a pedestrian hunter in the grass. What binds them is a shared ancient past in which they were almost identical. When you realize all this, that the hedgehog saw mammoths, that it had giant predatory ancestors, that it is kin to the bat, your attitude toward it changes completely. This is not a character from a children's book. It is a living witness to the history of the planet. A separate, massive chapter of this history is the story of the hedgehog alongside humans. It is longer and stranger than one might think. Hedgehogs and humans have coexisted not for thousands, but for tens of thousands of years. Their bones are found at the sites of ancient people. Yes, our distant ancestors ate hedgehogs. In ancient Egypt, however, the hedgehog was treated with respect. It was depicted on amulets and considered a symbol of rebirth because the hedgehog sort of died for the winter and returned to life in the spring. The Egyptians even placed hedgehog figurines in tombs so that the deceased, like a hedgehog, would come alive in the afterlife. Some of these figurines are more than 3,000 years old, and they have survived to our day. In ancient Rome, hedgehogs were sold in markets, and their spiky skins were used to make brushes for carding wool. This was a whole mini-industry. Hedgehogs were harvested so actively that at one point their numbers became alarmingly low, and one of the Roman emperors issued a special decree for the protection of the hedgehog. In essence, it was one of the first laws in human history to protect a specific animal, and it was dedicated specifically to the hedgehog. But then a dark page begins. In some regions, the hedgehog was long considered a pest because of an absurd myth that it sucks milk from cows at night. This is physically impossible. A hedgehog's mouth is too small, and a cow simply wouldn't let it near. But the myth was stubborn, and bounties were even paid for hedgehog heads. Over 2 centuries, in just one country, about 500,000 hedgehogs were killed due to this fiction. 500,000 creatures, over something they fundamentally could not do. Hedgehogs were eaten in times closer to ours as well, especially during lean years. There was even an ancient method of preparation. The hedgehog was coated entirely in clay and baked in a bonfire. The clay hardened, it was cracked open, and the needles came off with it, leaving clean meat. They say it tasted like pork. Honestly, I have no desire to test that. But you can't erase words from history. Today, of course, nobody eats hedgehogs or turns them into wool brushes anymore. But this doesn't mean at all that humans have ceased to be the main threat to the hedgehog. On the contrary, the methods have changed, but the scale has only grown. And here we arrive at the strangest, almost unbelievable part of this entire story. Because right now, the exact same animal in one part of the world is desperately clinging to survival, while in another, it is being exterminated as a dangerous invader. But before we reach this paradox, I will tell you a few things about the hedgehog that you will most likely refuse to believe. Let's start with vision. The hedgehog is very nearsighted. At a distance of more than a meter, it sees the world as a blurry gray blur. However, it can detect ultraviolet light. This means that in the dark, when it seems to us that there is just blackness around, the world glows slightly for the hedgehog. The tracks and markings of other animals leave a faint glow in UV light, and the hedgehog literally follows a glowing map of scents and tracks leading it to its prey. Next, water. You'd think, short legs, a heavy body, needles. What kind of swimming could there be? But hedgehogs swim perfectly well and can cross a small pond. The needles don't get completely soaked because air stays trapped between them, and the hedgehog floats on the water like a living bobber. There is only one problem. A hedgehog cannot climb out of a steep pool with smooth walls and drowns from exhaustion. Therefore, if you have a garden pond or a pool, throw a plank or a piece of bark into it. A fallen hedgehog will be able to climb out, and this small gesture will save its life. Now for what amused me personally the most. Hedgehogs snore. Loudly, almost like a human. In centers where hedgehogs are rehabilitated, staff complain that at night there is such a snoring in the enclosures that it's impossible to fall asleep. A tiny animal, but it produces a substantial sound. And hedgehogs, it turns out, have something like accents. Hedgehogs from different areas make slightly different sounds. The huffing, squeaking, and grunting differ slightly, depending on where the animal comes from. This doesn't carry much meaning. It just reflects that different groups of hedgehogs lived apart for a long time. But the very fact that a solitary nocturnal creature has a regional dialect is beautiful to me. Another fact. Every night, a hedgehog walks up to 3 kilometers on its tiny legs that are just a couple of centimeters long. For a creature of that size, it is a real half marathon every single night. That is why a hedgehog eats so much and so greedily. It is essentially a survival athlete that must constantly replenish a huge expenditure of energy. There are also albino hedgehogs, white with pink eyes. It's tough for them in the wild because they are too visible, but they exist. There's even a whole island where a colony of such light hedgehogs lives, becoming a local attraction. And there is a completely different twist. Small African pygmy hedgehogs are kept as pets today. This is a distinct species, smaller than ours. In some cities, hedgehog cafes even operate, where people come to drink tea and pet hedgehogs. A whole industry. And in this lies a bitter irony, which we have finally approached. While some hedgehogs are being petted in cozy cafes, the wild hedgehog in nature is living through one of the most alarming moments in its long history on the planet. What is happening with the hedgehog right now is something I haven't encountered anywhere else in nature. In the old world, in its native lands, the hedgehog is quietly dying out. Over the past 20 years, hedgehog populations have declined by an estimated 70%. This means that out of every 10 hedgehogs that lived here in the early 2000s, only 3 remain today. The hedgehog has been officially given a status as a species of concern. What is particularly haunting is that it is disappearing without noise, without news, without headlines, and without rallies, just one by one, quietly in the grass behind your fence. There are several reasons. First, cars. A hedgehog's instinct in times of danger is to curl into a ball and wait. For millions of years, this worked flawlessly against foxes and wolves. Against a car, it doesn't work at all. A curled-up hedgehog on the road turns into a stationary target. In just one small country, hundreds of thousands of hedgehogs die under wheels every year and across the continent. The count goes into millions. Second, garden chemicals. Slugs that have eaten poisoned pellets become a toxin for the hedgehog. Third, loss of habitat. A hedgehog needs thickets, hedgerows, piles of branches, and overgrown corners. A modern garden is a manicured lawn from fence to fence and bare earth. In such a sterile landscape, a hedgehog simply has nowhere to live. And fourth, especially painful reason, spring grass burnings. People set fire to last year's dry grass, and inside it sit hedgehogs that have just woke up after hibernation. They don't manage to run away. Every spring, tens of thousands of hedgehogs die this way, and almost nobody sees it because a burned hedgehog simply blends into the ash. And now, that very paradox, because there is a place on Earth where they fight against the hedgehog with all their might. Once, hedgehogs were introduced to New Zealand, islands where they had never existed natively. They were brought with good intentions to remind settlers of home, but the hedgehogs thrived all too well. It turned out that in local nature, where birds had lived for millions of years without such predators, the hedgehog became a real disaster. It raids the nests of rare birds, eats their eggs and chicks, and decimates local insects and lizards. Now, hedgehogs there are purposefully trapped and destroyed to save endangered birds. Think about it. The exact same animal. In one part of the world, it is mourned, and people try to save it from extinction. In another, it is exterminated as a dangerous invader. And in both cases, the fault lies with humans. The humans who brought it to the wrong place, or the humans who failed to protect its home. The hedgehog in this story is both a victim and a culprit at the same time, though in reality, it isn't guilty of anything. It is just doing what it always did. We are the ones who put it on the wrong shelf of the planet. Finally, the most important point. Why have I spent so much time telling you about a small, spiky creature that many of you may not have even seen in real life? Because the hedgehog is not just an animal, it is an indicator, a living sensor that shows how healthy the earth is beneath your feet. Where a hedgehog lives, there are insects. Where there are insects, there is healthy soil, clean water, and a living nature that hasn't been cleaned out to sterility. When the hedgehog disappears, dozens of less noticeable creatures that nobody counts follow quietly in its wake. The hedgehog leaves first and essentially signals, the chain is breaking. There is an old saying that is more than 2,000 years old. The fox knows many tricks, but the hedgehog knows one big one. The fox knows many ploys, but the hedgehog knows just one thing: how to survive, how to outlast mammoths, ice ages, and entire eras while barely changing, and how not to be separate from the earth, but a part of it. We humans have spent the last 100 years carefully learning to be separate. We built cities, paved fields and asphalt, and cordoned ourselves off with fences. But the hedgehog crossing your garden path on a summer night quietly reminds you that he was here long before us. And with any luck, he will remain here after us too. If luck runs out, he will leave unnoticed, without saying goodbye, just like everything goes when we fail to appreciate it in time. And here, I want to ask you for one thing. This channel has no advertising and no sponsors. It lives only thanks to you. If this video made you look at the hedgehog differently, Support the channel with any amount according to the details in the description. Consider this your small contribution to the Hedgehog home, to ensuring that such stories continue to come out. And be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. New videos about animals and the wild world come out here every week, which is closer to us than it seems.